In the heart of the 1970s, a tale of eerie dread unfolds. Meet John, a curious soul who stumbles upon an ancient, enigmatic doll in a shadow-laden antique shop. The air turns cold as the shopkeeper, an aged woman shrouded in mystery, whispers a dire warning. This doll, once a prized possession of a famed puppeteer, carries a dark curse. John, scoffing at such old wives' tales, welcomes the doll into his home, but soon the lines between life and artifice blur. His skin begins to mimic porcelain, his eyes glaze with a doll's lifeless sheen. In a heart-stopping revelation, the truth unravels. The doll, known as Arthur, has sinisterly swapped his consciousness with John's. Now, as John transforms into a life-size puppet, Arthur steps into the world with a human guise. Dare to witness this chilling saga where the strings of fate twist in unimaginable ways. The bell above the door chimed softly as John pushed open the heavy wooden door of the antique shop. A musty scent, a blend of old wood and forgotten memories, greeted him as he stepped inside. The shop was a cluttered maze of relics from the past, each with its own untold story. Dimly lit by flickering lights, it felt like stepping back in time, a perfect setting for an explorer like John, always on the hunt for unique artifacts. As he meandered through the narrow aisles, his eyes fell upon a peculiar doll sitting alone on a high shelf. It was dressed in an old-fashioned suit, its porcelain face painted with meticulous care, yet there was something unsettling about its glassy eyes. "Ah, I see you found Arthur," came a voice, brittle and aged, like the pages of a long-forgotten book. John turned to see the shopkeeper, a frail, elderly woman, emerging from the shadows, her eyes sharp and knowing, fixed on the doll with a mix of reverence and fear. "Arthur?" John asked, curiosity piqued. "Yes," she said, her voice a whisper. "That doll belonged to a renowned puppeteer from the early 1900s. They say he poured his soul into his creations, especially that one." John, intrigued, asked, "Why is it here?" The shopkeeper sighed, a sound like rustling leaves. "The puppeteer sought eternal life. Rumors say he found a way to imbue his essence into his favorite doll. But such things come with a price. A curse, they say." John chuckled. "A cursed doll? Sounds like a story out of a horror film." The woman's expression darkened. "It's no laughing matter, young man. Strange things have happened to those who've owned it. Unexplained incidents." But John wasn't deterred. The allure of owning such a unique piece was too strong. How much for the doll? The shopkeeper hesitated, her eyes darting between John and the doll. "I must warn you, some treasures are best left untouched." But John, driven by a mix of skepticism and fascination, insisted. Finally, with a resigned sigh, the shopkeeper named her price. It was more than reasonable. As John handed over the money and took possession of the doll, a chill ran down his spine. For a moment, he could have sworn the doll's eyes flickered with a semblance of life. "Take care, John," the shopkeeper said as he left, her voice heavy with unspoken worry. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows on the pavement. John, with the doll under his arm, couldn't shake off the feeling that he had just become part of a story much larger and darker than he could have imagined. The journey home felt longer than usual, the weight of the doll in his arms growing heavier with each step. The evening had settled in with a quiet stillness as John arrived home, the peculiar doll, now known as Arthur, cradled in his arms. He pushed open the door to his modest living room, a space that felt emptier than usual. Perhaps it was the lingering echo of his recent breakup, the absence of laughter and warmth that once filled these walls. Placing Arthur in an old cushioned armchair, John regarded the doll with a mix of amusement and unease. "Well, Arthur," he began, his voice echoing slightly in the empty room. "You're probably the only friend I've got left now." The doll's glassy eyes seemed to gaze back, unblinking and eerily attentive. Shaking off a shiver, John headed to the kitchen and returned with a bottle of whiskey and a glass. As he poured himself a drink, the weight of his loneliness settled heavily on his shoulders. "Here's to new beginnings, eh?" he toasted, lifting his glass towards Arthur. The doll, dressed in its dated suit, sat motionless, an unwilling participant in this one-sided conversation. As the night wore on and the bottle gradually emptied, John's words flowed more freely. He spoke of his ex-girlfriend, of the arguments and the painful goodbye, his words tinged with regret and heartache. He talked about his dreams, once bright and ambitious, now dulled by the monotony of his daily life. "You know, Arthur," John slurred, his speech thick with alcohol, "I thought she was the one, but I guess I was just fooling myself. You ever been in love, Arthur?" He laughed at his own absurdity, talking to a doll as if expecting an answer, but then something strange happened. In his drunken haze, John saw Arthur's head tilt slightly, its painted lips curving into what seemed like a smile. "Good one, Arthur," John chuckled, raising his glass in a mock salute. "You're quite the listener." His eyes grew heavy, the room spinning gently around him. The last thing he remembered before succumbing to sleep was the unsettling smile on Arthur's face, a silent, knowing smirk. Morning came, with rays of sunlight filtering through the curtains, painting the room in a soft, warm glow. John awoke with a start, his head pounding and his mouth dry. As he sat up, he caught sight of Arthur, still seated in the armchair, its expression blank and inanimate. "Must have been the whiskey," John muttered to himself, trying to shake off the eerie feeling from the night before. He stood up, his legs unsteady, and made his way to the kitchen for a glass of water, casting one last dubious glance at the doll. The events of the previous night seemed surreal in the light of day. John convinced himself it was all just the alcohol playing tricks on his mind. Little did he know, it was just the beginning of a series of strange occurrences that would soon envelop his life. Exhausted from the restless night, John slumped onto the sofa, his gaze drifting towards Arthur, the doll sitting silently in the armchair. Despite the bright morning sun filtering through the windows, a shadow seemed to linger in the room, an unshakable sense of unease that John couldn't quite pinpoint. "You know, Arthur," John began, his voice a mixture of contemplation and sorrow, "they say that the greatest storms bring about the most beautiful rainbows. The worse the tempest, the more stunning the aftermath." He paused, his eyes lost in the distance. "I guess that's what this heartache is, a storm, paving the way for something better." John's fingers traced the rim of his coffee mug, the warmth of the drink, a small comfort. "This pain, this ache in my heart, it's got to mean something, right? It's got to be leading to something great. Maybe it's life's way of saying that something bigger and better is on the horizon, that the bigger the hurt, the bigger the silver lining." As the day faded into night, John's conversation with the inanimate Arthur continued, a cathartic release for his pent-up emotions. The doll, with its glassy, unblinking eyes, remained a silent observer, an eerie confidant to John's deepest thoughts and fears. After a while, feeling drained, John decided to freshen up. He trudged to the bathroom, his movements heavy, weighed down by a cocktail of grief and exhaustion. The hot shower was a brief respite, the steam and warmth enveloping him, momentarily washing away his troubles. Stepping out of the shower, John wiped the fogged-up mirror with his hand. As he looked at his reflection, he froze. There, on his face, was a small patch of skin that looked different. It was unnaturally smooth, almost porcelain-like, and had a faint sheen to it. John leaned closer, his heart pounding in his chest. The patch was near his jawline, stark against his normal skin. Panic and confusion set in. He touched it, tentatively, half expecting it to feel cold and hard like a doll's skin. But it felt normal, just looked bizarrely different. John's mind raced with possibilities. A skin condition, an allergic reaction, something explainable. Yet, deep down, a gnawing fear began to take hold. A fear that this was no ordinary ailment. He backed away from the mirror, his eyes wide with disbelief, glancing towards the living room, where Arthur sat unmoving. A chilling thought crossed his mind. Was this connected to the doll? Was the shopkeeper's warning more than just a tale? Shaking his head, John tried to dismiss the thought. It was just a coincidence. It had to be. Yet, as he settled into bed, the image of his altered reflection haunted him, and the once comforting silence of his home now felt oppressively heavy. The night closed in, and with it, the unsettling feeling that something inexplicable was beginning to happen. Morning light streamed through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the room. John slowly opened his eyes, expecting to start another day, but something was terribly wrong. He tried to move, to sit up, but his body refused to obey. Panic surged through him as he lay there, immobile, a prisoner in his own body. His heart raced, fear gripping him like a vice. Struggling for movement, John's eyes darted around the room, finally landing on his reflection in the bedroom mirror. The sight that met him was horrifying and surreal. Staring back at him was not his familiar face, but the lifeless porcelain features of a large doll. His skin was smooth and shiny, his eyes glassy and vacant. A scream built up inside him, but no sound came out. Then he noticed Arthur, perched at the end of his bed. The doll was different now, almost animated. And as John watched in disbelief, Arthur began to speak with a voice that was calm yet chilling. "Thank you, John." Arthur's voice was soft, almost grateful, for sharing your thoughts, your sorrows. It's been so long since I've heard a human voice, felt a human presence. John's mind reeled in shock and terror. This couldn't be happening. It was impossible. Arthur continued. "You spoke of pain and heartache, of a storm leading to a silver lining. I too have felt such pain, trapped for years in that shop, yearning for release, a pain so deep I knew it heralded something special, a turning point." John's eyes, wide with fear, remained fixed on Arthur as the doll stood up, its movements smooth and eerily human. "And now, here we are," Arthur said, a hint of triumph in his voice. "The silver lining has arrived. Your body, your movement, they're mine now. And you, John, you get to experience the stillness, the silence I endured for so long." John's heart pounded in his chest, a futile protest against his impending fate. Arthur walked towards the door, each step a reminder of what John had lost. "As for me," Arthur said, turning back one last time, "I'll finally live again. A new life, a new beginning, thanks to you." With that, Arthur opened the door and stepped out into the world, leaving John alone in the silent room. John's vision began to blur, the edges of the room fading into darkness. He felt his consciousness slipping away, his thoughts growing distant and muffled, as if he were sinking into a deep, dark ocean. And then there was nothing but stillness. John, now a life-size doll, lay motionless on the bed, his glassy eyes staring emptily at the ceiling. The room was quiet, the only sound the soft ticking of a clock, marking the passing of time in a world John could no longer be a part of. And if you're still looking to fulfill your thirst for more horror, don't forget to check out this next video. Unless, of course, you are frozen with fear already.